And I'll introduce tonight's talker, who is me. So I am going to talk about building a Buddhaland. So last week, you remember that we, with Vedanya, we dived into one of the big Mahayana sutras. It was the Sutra of Golden Light. So Vedanya gave a talk on the Sutra of Golden Light. And it's a very colourful, very mythical, quite way out in a way, account of how to transform ourselves and how to transform the world. And Vedanya ended the talk by saying that if enough of us let the Dharma transform our lives, then we'll create a different world entirely. We will create a pure land. And he just ended the talk there. So this week's talk is really about that possibility. It's about the possibility of creating a pure land. And in a way, tonight's talk is why that possibility is not just an impossible idealistic dream. In a way, it's an absolute necessity, both for the world and for each of us individually. Okay, so what do we mean by a pure land? Vedanya used the word pure land. And so pure land is a term that is used synonymously for Buddhaland and for Buddha field. So building a Buddhaland is the title of my talk. That if you looked on the web, on the poster, that's what you'll have seen. But it could equally well have been called building a pure land or building a Buddhaland, building a Buddha field. And okay, it's in a way, each of those terms refers to an ideal or a myth within Mahayana Buddhism, which is the style of Buddhism that emerged probably half a millennia after the Buddha's passing away, and which went on then to become the dominant form of Buddhism probably in the world, but certainly in the northern extent of Buddhism. And a Buddhaland, or a pure land, or a Buddha field, that ideal is incredibly important in Mahayana Buddhism. As important as the other great ideal of Mahayana Buddhism, which is the Bodhisattva ideal. And of course the two are inextricably linked. So a Bodhisattva, most of you will remember, is in a sense the ideal Buddhist. A Bodhisattva is a being, probably an enlightened being, who is practicing to bring about the enlightenment of all sentient beings. So you could say that the Bodhisattva is working for the welfare of the world. It's working to transform the world. And along with the Bodhisattva ideal comes the idea that an enlightened being, a Buddha or a Bodhisattva, creates or manifests a sort of beautiful, paradisical environment around them. An environment in which everything expresses the beauty and truth of the Dharma, and in which beings can grow very, very quickly towards enlightenment. So the water in a Buddhaland produces bliss and delight for anyone who bathes in it, or who drinks it, or smells it, or even hears it flowing. The trees are made of crystallized light, and they create beautiful music when the breeze ruffles them. And the birds sing the song of the truth with the voices of beautiful musical instruments, and so on and so on. A Buddha land, a pure land, is very pure and very beautiful, very paradisical. So the idea is, in Mahayana Buddhism, that beings who have a connection with a particular Buddha or a particular Bodhisattva can come to inhabit that Buddha or Bodhisattva's pure land, their Buddha land. And that means kind of living in the sphere of their influence, in circumstances that are actually very beautiful, very blissful, and very, very conducive to enlightenment. and they all live in a very harmonious state, a state of deep communication with each other and with the Buddha or Bodhisattva who's created the land, who's built that community. So in a way, everyone in a Buddhaland is in such deep communication that they all experience each other's positive states of mind. They all experience each other's bliss, everybody else's happiness, and so on. So it sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Living in a Buddhaland, living in a Pure Land. But of course it's a myth. So a Pure Land, in a way, is a very rich symbol, a very rich way of describing the enlightened state. In some ways, it's a much more accurate way of describing the enlightened state than an image of the Buddha, which is how we usually represent enlightenment. In some ways, it's a lot more accurate, a lot closer to the truth, because it reflects the fact that the outer world that we experience, every one of us, reflects our inner states of mind. So enlightened beings, of course, would live in a kind of paradise because their states of mind are positive, whatever the circumstances. And it also brings out the fact that enlightenment is not an isolated state. Really, if we're seeing things as they really are, well, that would mean expanding our view of the world, our sphere of concern, if you like, to include, well, the whole of reality and all other beings. So enlightenment would be a state of very deep communication, very deep understanding and empathy with others, a deep harmony with other beings. And it's also a good way of kind of idealising enlightenment, because it emphasises the fact that our inner states have a very profound effect, not only on us, but on the other people around us. And we know that. We know that, that when people who we're around, who we know well, who we're attuned to, are in a bad mood, we pick up on that and we feel grumpy or a bit resentful or a bit down. And when they're happy, we kind of catch their mood, and that helps us to be happy. And there are some people that it is just incredibly pleasant, even inspiring to be around. They just seem to carry an atmosphere that we can pick up on and just enjoy. And if you take that to an extreme, well, you can imagine that a fully enlightened being is going to be like that, but on steroids. They're just going to be, they're just going to exude positive states of mind. And if you know them, if you're attuned to them, then you're just going to feel really happy and positive when you're around them. So, in the Mahayana, the idea of the Buddha or the Bodhisattva creating a Pure Land kind of gets extended, it gets stretched to include other serious Buddhist practitioners, and especially groups of people who are seriously practicing the Dharma, seriously trying to practice the Bodhisattva path, so the path of practicing for the sake of other beings. So people practicing the Dharma, especially groups of people practicing the Dharma together, are seen as being able to create a sort of Pure Land themselves, a sort of building a Buddhaland themselves, a sort of mini Pure Land, mini Buddhaland. And that's not surprising, because groups of people who are practicing together and who are practicing really sincerely and who've got a very strong shared vision, they do have a strong effect, much stronger than any one individual is going to have. And even quite ordinary folk, quite ordinary Buddhist practitioners like us, can collectively create an atmosphere which is positive and kind and friendly and supportive and ethical, and actually, ultimately, just very pleasant to be around. So individually our efforts might feel a bit puny, but together we can create a real sphere of influence which is very pleasant to be in and very supportive, and is likely to attract other people just because it's a very pleasant environment. So, people come and join and practice with us, and so the Sangha grows. So the Buddhaland is built. So, in Mahayana Buddhism, the Bodhisattva practices for the benefit of all beings. So the aim is to attract as many beings as possible to this Buddhaland. Ideally, the Bodhisattva wants to attract every being that lives to his Buddhaland or her Buddhaland. So creating a positive community, creating a Sangha, building a Sangha is seen as an essential part of practice. So we don't just meditate, we don't just focus on improving our own mental states, we don't just study the Dharma and reflect and seek to gain insight into the nature of things for our own sake. Of course, we do all of those things, but we also develop positive relationships with other people with similar aspirations. We forge friendships, we create, as far as we can, deep communication with other people, and we try to create an environment, a community, in which other people can do the same thing. So, building a Buddhaland is a practice. It's a practice that Buddhists can engage in. And at the beginning of the talk, I made quite a strong statement. I said that it's a practice that's essential for the world and it's essential for us individually. So I just want to take a look at why, to kind of justify that statement. Okay, I've got 3 reasons why building a Buddhaland is essential for transforming us individually. And the first reason is that, it works against us having too tight a focus on ourselves. So, we're fundamentally deluded worldlings. And in a way, one of our biggest mistakes is to think that, it's all about me, it's all about me. And it's me that I've got to practice for, it's me that I need to work on, it's me that I've got to make happy. And until we're enlightened, that tendency is going to be there to a greater or lesser extent. And our focus might get more skillful. Buddhist practice will help. It will make us more mindful. It will probably make us kinder. It will make us more ethical. But it can be that the results of Buddhist practice are to, in a way, move us from me and my possessions and my reputation and my concerns, which is where we start, to me and my practice, my mental states, my insight. And the great thing about building a Buddhaland is that you can't do it alone. You cannot build a Buddhaland on your own. And the shift, if you're building a Buddhaland, if that's the focus of your practice, has to be away from my and towards our. It's a collective practice. So working with others on something much bigger than any of us means we just have to get our own stuff in perspective. We have to deal with the things that stop us from working effectively with other people, that cut us off from others, that make us dysfunctional and difficult. And actually dealing with those things is a great, great way to grow. And anyone who has worked in a right livelihood team, like the Evolution Shop that we used to have in Orchard Square, who works in the centre team or works on any of the teams at the centre, or for the still learning right livelihood business that we run, anyone who's worked in that kind of situation will have experienced that. Okay, so the second reason why I think that building a Buddhaland is an essential practice for us individually is that, it's very obvious really, it creates supportive conditions for our practice. All things are dependent on conditions, and we're going to grow an awful lot faster if we have conditions that are going to support our growth. So to grow towards enlightenment ourselves, we need to join with others to create a supportive community in which we can all grow, every one of us. Can't do it on our own. So building a Buddhaland and pursuing our own spiritual development are not two separate activities. Really, they're two sides of the same coin. Third reason why building a Buddhaland is essential for us. And that is that it encourages a right view of reality. So in a way, it's an insight practice. Enlightenment is about going beyond the boundaries of our tight little selves. And the nearer we get to enlightenment, the less we see our own benefit as separate from the benefit of other people. The less we see the goal as about vanishing into some private paradise, and the more we see it as about creating something that includes others, that we share with others, and that we enjoy in communication with others. As Samgrahavastus, our founder, is fond of saying, there's no such thing as an individualistic liberation. So to try and practice just for ourselves is self-defeating. The means of getting to the goal will contradict the goal. It's like hurrying up to relax. So 3 very good reasons for building the Buddhaland. Okay, so why is building a Buddhaland essential for transforming the world? Some of the people here tonight actually have just come from a retreat that was being run at Anastana at the weekend called World on Fire? World on Fire. And that's based on a very famous quote by the Buddha. The Buddha said in the fire sermon that the world is a flame. It's burning with the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion. So, we've probably noticed those fires burning. The fires of corporate greed, putting profit before people. The fires of hatred, destroying lands and peoples for their wealth or their resources, or simply because they're different from the people who started the war. And actually, closer to home, we've probably seen those fires burning in ourselves. Making sure we profit from opportunities, slagging off those who threaten our reputation or who are simply a bit different from us. So none of us are immune from those fires. And there is a way to quench the fires, to cool the world. There is a different way of being in the world. And the practice of building a Buddhaland kind of points us in that direction. It helps us practice for the welfare of the many, as the Buddha was wont to say. It gives us a perspective not of me, but of us. And with that perspective comes kindness and generosity and honesty and all the qualities that are needed for transforming the world. Actually, at this point in writing the talk, I was reminded of a strapline that Oxfam used to put on their carrier bags a few years ago. It was a really good strapline. It said, "Alone we're only human, together we're humankind." It's a really good strapline, I thought. And actually, Oxfam and many of the other agents for social change in the world, they've got the right idea. They're working to move the world in the right direction. The problem is that real change only happens in the world by changing people's hearts and minds. The change needs to start internally, it needs to start inside, and then kind of work its way out to manifest in the world. So the people who really change the world for the better are the ones who've really worked on themselves to begin with, and who've got a vision of what the world could be like. So, the Buddha is the obvious example of that, but there are lots and lots of others. One that came to mind, or two that came to mind immediately, were Dr. Ambedkar, the Indian leader of the people who used to be the untouchables, who did a huge amount of work in India with the untouchable community, but who was also a minister in the first government of the independent India. And Sanggrahavastus, the founder of the Triratna Buddhist community, our own leader. And Sanggrahavastus, well, actually, I suppose all three, was a great exponent of building the Buddhaland. Sanggrahavastus being a very practical man, as well as an idealist, and a very observant man in terms of human nature, he took the Buddhaland ideal a step further. He said that to transform the world, we need to create a new society. a society that's run on dharmic principles, supporting the growth of the individuals in it. And the new society would be a spiritual community like our Sangha, but it would also provide really intensive conditions for practice by allowing Sangha members to live together and work together. And as you know, quite a few individuals in our Sangha do that. We've got a men's community, a women's community, and several other independent houses around Sheffield where Buddhists are living together. We did have the Evolution Shop in town. We have got an education service which is run as a livelihood. And, well, there's talk of other livelihoods that may happen. And I have to say that I've been impressed at the progress that's been made by people who have put themselves into those intensive conditions for growth. They grow impressively quickly compared with other people. And I realised when I was writing the talk as well that the last three people, all women actually, who've been ordained from the Sheffield Sangha, have all been people who've put themselves into those sorts of conditions. So they've all lived out the ideal of the new society, of building a Buddhaland, and have in the process transformed themselves. So, the two are inseparable. Okay, so how do we build a Buddhaland? Well, you can do it very simply, really, just by living out the ideal. Living out the ideal of building a pure land as fully as you can possibly manage it. Taking that ideal into all of our practice, into all of our lives. Living the Dharma life in company with others, supporting others, and accepting their support of us. And for many of us, certainly for me, just reflecting on the myth of building a Buddhaland, just holding it in mind, is enough. I find it incredibly inspiring. It's what I do most mornings. I bring to mind all of you and the rest of the Sheffield Sangha. And I connect with the vision of what the Sangha really could be, the best that we could be. And connecting with our aspiration in that way, and doing it repeatedly does actually have an effect. It begins, when I began to do that, it was something that felt kind of artificial, but now actually it's something that comes to mind very, very readily, an awful lot of the time. An awful lot of the time when I'm with the Sangha, with individuals, with groups of Sangha members. I, in particular, love the idea of us all, in a way, treading the path together, treading the Buddhist path together, benefiting one another, being supported by one another. I certainly feel supported by people in the Sangha. And maybe, just maybe, we're doing that lifetime after lifetime, who knows? I can't remember any of my previous lives, but I might have known some of you before. And I also love the idea that we together can be a bodhisattva. When we're engaged in the practice of building a Buddhaland, we are collectively a bodhisattva, gathering a Buddhaland, gathering a community around them, making a pure land for other people to come in and enjoy and benefit from. So part of living out the ideal is actually just having that vision, just keeping that vision in mind. So you might like to reflect on the idea of building a Buddhaland as collective practice. Just let it inspire you. But for those of us who like to have a set of practical guidelines, there is a list. We are Buddhists, of course. So it's got an interesting history, this list. It originates in a story in the Pali Canon, which is the oldest part of the Buddhist scriptures, which predates the Mahayana movement. And it's in a scripture called the Hataka Sutta. And Hataka is an interesting character. So Hataka is a Buddhist name. It's a bit like Suryamati or Maitridasa or Amoghavamsa. And Hataka was so named when he became a follower of the Buddha. And he was named after the word for hand, as Hataka claimed that he was saved by the Buddha from being eaten by a malevolent demon. He says that the Buddha persuaded the demon to hand him over to the Buddha. Now, I'm not quite sure what that was about. My guess is that Hataka might previously have been in the grip of an addiction or some destructive obsession, or perhaps a mental illness of the severer sort. Anyway, Hataka came to be known as the foremost of the Buddha's disciples in gathering a community. Now, if you read the Pali Canon, you'll find that there are lots of the Buddha's disciples, the Buddha's followers, who are named as being foremost in this or that. Subhuti was foremost in friendliness, and Sariputra was foremost in wisdom. Moggallana was foremost in psychic powers, and so on. So Hataka was foremost in gathering a community. And Hataka was a lay follower of the Buddha, so a bit like us. He became a follower when the Buddha arrived in his town in northern India. He was really inspired by the Dharma that the Buddha taught. And he continued to practice when the Buddha left to continue his travels around northern India. And the Buddha went off, and the Buddha did many circuits of the areas of northern India. And it was several years before he came back to the town that Hataka lived in. And when he did come back several years later, Hataka came to see him again, but he didn't come alone. He came with 500 other people. And these people were all, by that time, followers of the Buddha, who most of them had never met. And the Buddha said, "This is amazing, Hataka. Well done. How have you managed to create such a huge following? How have you managed to gather this big community of Dharma-farers?" And Hataka says, "My teacher, it is by the 4 Samgrahavastus which you taught me when I gathered, that I gathered this community. When I know that I can make a connection with someone through generosity, then I use generosity. When I know I can make a connection with someone through kind speech, then I use kind speech. When I know I can make a connection with someone through beneficial activity, then I use beneficial activity. When I know I can make a connection with someone through exemplification or empathy, I use exemplification or empathy." And the Buddha says, "Well done, Hataka, sadhu, sadhu. This is just the way to attract a community. This is just the way to attract a large following. Whenever anyone has done it in the past, they've used these 4. Whoever wishes to do so in the future will need to use those 4 things." And Hataka leaves, and the Buddha goes on to praise Hataka to his other followers, holding her up as an example. So this list, these 4 Samgrahavastus, became very important in Mahayana Buddhism as the method by which bodhisattvas build a Buddhaland. So it's a very important list, and we can learn from it for our own practice of building a Buddhaland. Okay, so first of all, what does Samgrahavastus mean? Well, literally, it means a means of unification or means of gathering. So it's generally taken to be something like the means of gathering a community. So, it's the way by which you kind of attract people to practice the Dharma with you. It's the way in which you attract a Sangha. And there are 4 things on this list, all mentioned by Hataka. There's dana or generosity. There's priyavadita or kindly speech. There's arthacharya, which means beneficial activity. And there's samanata, which literally means sameness, and is usually translated either as exemplification or as empathy. And I'll explain why in a little while. So I want to talk a bit about each of them, probably mostly about dana, which seems to me to be the key to the rest of them, but a bit about all of them. Okay, so dana, generosity. Why does generosity help to build a Buddhaland? Well, actually, I think subversively, dana generosity is something that transforms the world by turning the market economy completely on its head. In the normal world, normal worldly values focus on me, they focus what I want. In relatively civilized societies, as ours usually is, there's a recognition that to get what I want, I'm probably going to have to give something in return. So we kind of get used to reciprocal transactions. We get used to striking bargains. I'll give you this if you give me that. You do that work for me and I'll pay you this amount. You need my expertise? I'll charge you X pounds an hour. So basically, what happens in that kind of transaction is that my egotism meets your egotism, and we agree a transaction. And the bigger ego probably gets the better deal, which is why they end up running corporations. So that's the economics of the marketplace, where people relate to each other in a way in the power mode. The people who are best at striking deals wield the most power. But relationships in a spiritual community, certainly in a Buddhaland, are not based on the power mode, they're based on the love mode. So they're not based on self-concern, but on concern for everybody, concern for all. And the main concern for people who are trying to build a Buddhaland is not, what can I get out of this, but, well, what's needed here? What can I contribute? How can I make things better? And it's not difficult to see why that would contribute to building a Buddhaland. If you're a mitra, think about how you felt when you got home the night of your mitra ceremony, with your carrier bags full of cards and gifts from the Sangha. Okay? People smiling. Yeah, it just makes you feel good. If you've been generous recently, then just call to mind your act of generosity and remember how it made you feel. Because there's something essentially liberating and ennobling, really, about the act of generosity, and that also makes you feel good. So generosity feels good both for the recipient and for the giver. And it's even inspiring to witness acts of generosity, to be around when generosity is happening. You may remember that last autumn, those of you who were here then, we asked you to consider giving a monthly standing order donation to the Buddhist Centre because our Sangha is growing and our centre team isn't big enough. We need more people to help with the work of the centre team. And your response, those of you who were around then, was so quick and so generous that we achieved our target of doubling our standing orders in 4 months, which is just amazing. And in the middle of that, in the middle of all this happening, all these donations rolling in, Padma Vajra, our president, came to visit for a week. And partway through the week, he said, it's amazing what's happening here. The Sheffield Sangha is even more inspired than usual. And at the end of the week, he said, I think the Sangha is even more inspired than usual because they're giving you money. There's something about the act of generosity that makes them feel good and that makes them feel as if they're participating in a collective act of generosity. They're acting together as a Sangha, they're building a Buddhaland, and that is inherently pleasant and inspiring for everybody. I suppose in a sense, it unites people just through bonds of mutual gratitude. So the economy of a Buddhaland is the Dharma economy, it's the generosity economy. The Dharma economy means we don't charge ever for teaching the Dharma. None of you were charged for your introductory course, those of you who attended introductory courses here. No one has asked you for any money to attend tonight, or when you come to Mitra study on Monday or Thursday, or when you come to weekend events, not even when you come to the events that cost the Buddhist Centre quite a lot of money, like the residential retreats that we run. All of those things are given to you out of generosity, and you're welcome to benefit from any of them. regardless of whether or not you ever give us a donation or help us in any way. They really are free and given from generosity. But of course, many of you, in fact most of you, contribute to the Dharma economy as well. Many of you help with classes, you help us run retreats, you bring food for others to enjoy, you help with cleaning the centre, with bookkeeping, with running the library, with cultivating the garden, and so on and so on and so on. All as part of practicing generosity, is your contribution to building the Buddhaland. And many of you give money. 168 at the last count, 168 Sangha members give a monthly standing order donation to the centre. And then there are people who give their time and their energy, often their whole lives. The people who run the centre do it either for nothing or they do it just for living expenses. They don't do it in exchange for some high salary, literally living expenses. And they do that as an act of dharma, giving up the chance to earn a salary in the world. So the Buddhist Centre is a network of giving. It's a shared project of building Buddhaland. Okay, kindly speech. Second of the Samgrahavastus. Priyavadata means dear, or it can mean pleasant. So Priyavadata is speaking as we speak to someone who is dear to us, which of course is speaking pleasantly, speaking kindly. And the dear is important. It's not just nice, it's not just nice speech, it's dear speech, or it's kindly speech. And that of course includes encouraging, praising, appreciating, thanking, apologising. And all of those sorts of speech have an incredibly powerful effect on people. We can often be a bit stingy with our talk, especially in Britain, I think. We have the habit of making sure that people don't get above themselves. I remember one of the things that one of my parents used to say to us is, "What makes you think you're so special?" There's something about, keeping people a bit in their place, a bit starved of praise and appreciation. But praising and appreciating people can make them visibly blossom and grow. And there's a sort of chain reaction that goes on with kindly speech. The more we speak kindly to each other or of each other, the more we want to do it. And the more it's safe to do it, because we've created an environment in which kindly speech is the norm. And then the more we can acknowledge and appreciate other people. Sangharakshita says that the Bodhisattva's loving speech is the expression of his delighted awareness of people's spiritual potential. So you could say that the Bodhisattva is seeing people as they really are. He's seeing their Buddha nature. And when we're practicing kindly speech, we're doing the same thing. We're seeing people as they really are. We're relating to what's highest in them. And that doesn't mean that in the Buddhaland, everyone is being a Pollyanna and is being really nice to each other. It doesn't mean that at all. It doesn't mean that elephants are swept under the carpet and no one mentions them. In fact, quite the opposite. Kindly speech does sometimes make clear to people the consequences of their actions and the consequences of their speech. Though it does mean doing that as skillfully and as kindly as possible. And there's a nice example of that from the life of the Buddha, actually. The Buddha didn't mince words. When he found a group of his followers who were deep in a dispute and all completely unwilling to change their point of view, to see the point of view of the other side, this is what he said. "Misguided men," he said, "what can you possibly know? What can you see that you take to quarrelling and brawling and are deep in dispute, stabbing each other with verbal daggers? Misguided men, that will lead to your harm and suffering for a long time." So the Buddha isn't avoiding difficult issues. He's just confronting people with the effects of their actions, with the consequences of their speech. He is concerned that the consequences of their unkind speech will be difficulties both for themselves and for others, and certainly for the Sangha. Okay, so you can kind of see how kindly speech will build a Buddhaland. Speech does create an atmosphere. It summons up a world, by the things we say, we do create an atmosphere. Verbal daggers do not create a happy atmosphere or conduce to spiritual progress for anyone. But kindly speech does. So in the Sangha, we aim to practice kindly speech constantly. In particular, we try to be friendly. We aim to put other people at their ease as much as we can. We aim to be welcoming to other to new people, to visitors to the centre. And we also practice rejoicing in the merits of others, just praising others, picking out the really great things about other people. And we do that individually on a kind of one-to-one basis, but we also do it formally at times like mitra ceremonies. And quite a few of you were probably here 3 weeks ago, was it? Not very long ago, when we had the last lot of mitra ceremonies, and so you will have heard people, the new mitras, being rejoiced in. And if you haven't heard Rejoicing in Merit and you would like to, you will get a chance to do that a week on Friday, when our very newest order member, Moksha Tara, will be arriving back in Sheffield and will have her official welcome here at the centre. Okay, Arthacharya. Sounds like a chap, doesn't it? Arthacharya, it means beneficial activity. And I suppose it just means helping. It means helping other people. And in a spiritual community, that's what people do. They just help each other. And in a way, that's the best way to cultivate friendship. Most people know that. And actually, the ways in which we help people may be just very ordinary and mundane, practical ways. We might be helping people to move house, helping them to shift something heavy. We might be babysitting for them, giving them a lift to a hospital appointment, taking them some food if they're sick, all sorts of very practical things. Just doing things for people creates mutual bonds of friendship. It creates community. And the Buddha certainly rated Arthacharya. He was very, very distressed when one of his followers, an old sick monk who had dysentery, was ignored by the others. And he personally, with Ananda, his assistant, cleaned up the sick man and made him comfortable. So small and large acts of kindness are very much part of building a Buddhaland. But Arthacharya also refers to what benefits people spiritually, what helps them to grow. The Buddha was quite clear in his instructions to his followers that once they were well established in their practice, once they had a good grasp of the Dharma, they should pass it on to others. There's a well-worn phrase that occurs again and again in the early scriptures, where the Buddha says, "Go now and wander for the welfare and happiness of many, out of compassion for the world, for the benefit, the well-being and happiness of gods and men." And this Buddhist Centre is, in a way, a collective act of Arthacharya. Must be 20 years ago or more now. The earliest order members in Sheffield, including Amoghadamsa, set up the first Sheffield Buddhist Centre, and they began to teach Buddhism and meditation to the people of Sheffield. And ever since then, the order members in Sheffield have taken on the running of the centre, which is now much bigger and in a different building, as an act of Arthacharya, as an act of beneficial activity. And the 33 order members in Sheffield, 34 as of next week, we all, every one of us, make some kind of contribution to the Arthacharya, the beneficial act of running this centre. So some people teach, some people help in more practical ways, but everyone does something to help out with the centre. And you don't have to be an order member to be able to help out, to be part of that collective act of Arthacharya. There are all sorts of ways in which you can help too. You can benefit people spiritually by joining one of the teams to support an introductory course. Those of you who've been on an introductory course here will know that we get a lot of people turn up to them. And because we get a lot of people wanting to do the course, we need big teams to support those courses. We've got one starting in September, and we are taking names now for the next course for anyone who wants to sign up for it. And of course you can practice Arthacharya very simply, just by helping your Sangha friends in very practical, very human ways. And then finally, Samanatha. So Samanatha is interesting. The word actually means sameness, but sameness isn't terribly explicit as a practice. And it's interpreted in two different ways. It's often interpreted as exemplification, the need to walk our talk. So you could say, better than giving 100 Dharma talks is actually just to live the Dharma life, to live as an exemplification of the Dharma. And conversely, all the talk in the world doesn't do any good if we don't live it. Nobody will take any notice. And you can kind of see why that helps to build a Buddhaland. It's very inspiring to see people who are living according to the Dharma, and especially seeing that having an effect, seeing them change for the better. Of course, the problem for a lot of us as practicing Buddhists is that we don't always completely exemplify the Dharma. And none of us is perfect. But in a way, it isn't about exemplifying the Dharma perfectly. There is something that is, in a way, even more inspiring about someone who is practicing the Dharma, living according to the Dharma a lot of the time, but then being quite open and frank about their shortcomings, because they're exemplifying a kind of movement in a particular direction. They're exemplifying being human and having an aspiration to live more and more in accordance with the Dharma, more and more transforming themselves and transforming the world. So the other interpretation of Samanatha is one of empathy, and this is about seeing the sameness between ourselves and others. Okay, so if we see the sameness between ourselves and others, well, you could call that empathy. We can see that actually we are all the same in wanting happiness, that we're all the same in struggling to achieve happiness, that we're all subject to conditions, that we all have flaws and shortcomings. So if we act from this sense of sameness, this sense of empathy, then the obvious thing is to treat other people as we would wish to be treated ourselves, treating them in the best way that we would hope to be treated. So seeing the good in them, being patient with them, encouraging them, supporting them, forgiving their flaws. And, well, you can see very easily that that sort of empathy is very fertile soil for growth in the Buddhaland. Okay, so, nearly finished. And actually this is the last of this series of talks on transforming self and world. And in a way it's quite fitting that the last talk should be about building the Buddhaland. I said at the beginning that building a Buddhaland is not an impossible idealistic dream, but an absolute necessity for ourselves and the world. We know that idealists who focus on transforming the world and ignore their own deeply ingrained greed and hatred aren't terribly effective. But conversely, if we concentrate on ourselves and we ignore the world, then we can kind of disappear into self-defeating concern with ourselves and our own practice. So the myth of building a Buddhaland is the antidote to both of those extremes. It addresses the transformation of the world as a collective practice, and it transforms the world, and in the process, it transforms us. And Sheffield Buddhist Centre is actually built on the myth of building the Buddhaland. In a way, it's the myth on which the Triratna Buddhist order and community is built. I'm told by people who go to conferences with leaders of other Buddhist groups that the Triratna Buddhist community is known for two things. Other Buddhists notice two things about us. The first, actually, is our knowledge of the Dharma. But the second is significantly our emphasis on Sangha. We're known for having a really strong emphasis on building Sangha. And it's not surprising that the archetypal figure that is taken as the symbol of the Triratna Buddhist order and community is the thousand-armed Avalokiteshvara. We definitely see the spiritual path as a collective practice and not an individual practice. So our aim, it is to transform ourselves. We're practicing for the attainment of enlightenment. But as Vedanya said in a very memorable talk a few years ago, if we're aiming to break out of the prison of samsara, we're not digging a tunnel for our own exclusive use. We're aiming for a mass breakout. So we're acknowledging the truth of interconnectedness by admitting that individually it will take us very much longer to reach enlightenment than it will collectively. However good a meditator we are, whatever insights we've had, we still need other people. We need friends to encourage us. We need friends to pick us up when we take a fall, to point out our blind spots, just even to be with so we don't get lonely or bored. So for our own sakes, to transform ourselves, we need a supportive environment to support our practice. We can provide that for ourselves and each other by practicing the 4 Samgrahavastus and creating an alternative environment in which generosity and kind speech, and beneficial activity and empathy replace more cynical worldly values. But the myth of the Buddhaland is about much more than just transforming ourselves. In a way, it's an alternative and much more expansive way of viewing reality and transforming the world. So building the Buddhaland is the beautiful myth on which our Sangha is built. And by transforming our bit of the world, we create something that's attractive, something beautiful, even something a bit magical. We build a Buddhaland, or a pure land, that will attract others so that little by little we transform ourselves and our Sangha, and then Sheffield, and then eventually we transform the world.